I'd like to share with you some of the events happening in Hong Kong and how would that and what would that bring us into thinking along what we are doing with the carbon emission situation in Hong Kong, particularly relating to building stock. The Hong Kong SAR government, day back in September 2010, has rolled out a public consultation document, which is called the Climate Change Strategy and Action Agenda. It highlights by 2020, compared to 1995, and they wish to change the energy supply and energy demand situation by switching to more nuclear use. For example, some of the highlight we are aware to nuclear power generation 50%, and LNG generation 40%, and the rest. And relatively, from my perspective, little emphasis has been put upon on buildings, right? And Europe has done a carbon calculator and worked out the corresponding implication of this strategy in terms of the carbon situation in Hong Kong. If you look at the graph on the left there, so with this strategy, 85% reduction will be achieved through the fuel mix switch to more nuclear and LNG and so on, and in which 60% almost done through by nuclear option, and only 8% are done through by the buildings. And this is what we find out from simply doing the carbon calculation. This maps the initial probably 2 decades, represented by blue dots there, representing the carbon emission per capita in Hong Kong. Those are real figures, right? But the subsequent curve is a curve representing, if we do follow the 2-degree limit, we know that the environmentalists and a lot of advanced economies in combating climate change, they also are talking about we need to avoid the catastrophic climate change situation, which is to avoid the 2-degree limit. So, for argument's sake, if Hong Kong is going to follow this 2-degree limit, that will be the path we need to follow per capita that we are in terms of carbon emission. At present, in Hong Kong, we are doing 6 tons per person per year carbon emission, which is more or less a well average in that instance. But by engaging the electricity fuel mix as per the suggestion in the consultation document by the government, we could probably reduce it, but we will have to rely a lot on the switch to the nuclear. But heard from the German government saying that they completely stopped relying on the nuclear after the Japanese tsunami and disasters. This is something for our government to review, and certainly for our community to think hard on that particular issue. So, but in order to catch this 2-degree limit, we have no choice basically, but by engaging a serious matter on designing our building stocks in achieving zero carbon buildings, and not at least zero carbon building on individual basis, but also think about the communities level. So clusters of buildings or areas in Hong Kong that we need to seriously think about achieving zero carbon in order to achieve this 2-degree limit. We see there's 3 kinds of carbon curve over the time with respect to the carbon reduction effort we need to do. We understand in the next 10 years, we might engage a series of power generation switch, fuel mix switch, which is relatively more straightforward. And next wave will be the zero carbon buildings, which I just shared with you. And last but not least, will be the zero carbon community at the infrastructure level, as well as on the building form level. We are basically have decades of experience in designing zero carbon building. Probably the first zero carbon building in the UK, completed in 2001, which is the quite famous patented Bedset building. And also quite recently, in fact this is 2009, we completed a project in Seoul for the Samsung construction into investigating doing a zero energy house for themselves. And lately we involved in the CIC zero carbon building. I think Dr. Guai Li, our next speaker, will share with you details of this. I'm not going to dwell on details of this. But instead, I'd like to talk a bit about the West Kowloon Cultural District. Just one slide, no more. Well, this is it. But I got interviewed by the SCMP a few months ago, and we discussed about the ambitious aim put forward by Foster working in conjunction with us in trying to achieve the buildings in the West Kowloon Cultural Plan to be zero carbon approach. This is it. I think since we put these slides on the SCMP, I received lots of phone calls from various sectors asking me how are we going to achieve it, but this is it. I got the occasion to share with you. Like a lot of others people doing, we need to review ourselves whether we can do a better design which will be energy demand less intensive by reducing the energy demand, undertaking passive design, similar to the German approach, and then we consider the district-wide community-based energy system, such as district cooling system in terms of improving the energy efficiency, and then we measure, we consider other measures in helping to bring down energy demand overall. Then we switch to the most expensive technology, which are the renewables, because we can't reduce energy demand anymore, so we need to generate the energy in a non-fossil fuel base, in renewable energy. But in such a community in West Kowloon, how we can put so much PV or other forms of renewable energy there in order to provide the carbon neutral approach. But in fact, we did not propose that. Instead, we proposed a equivalent waste to energy approach. We look at the waste generated in West Kowloon and the surrounding district a bit, and then instead of sending those waste to the reclamation, which will give up methane gas, which have more GHG potential than carbon, then we try to do it locally within the site by converting the waste into fuel gas, which will be used to support a fleet of fuel gas-driven bus within the West Kowloon. And in doing so, we can achieve this carbon neutrality. But it's not absolutely all by renewable PV and so on, but instead we make the equivalent of similar kinds of carbon emitted by the waste collected on this site and close vicinity, and that equate to the corresponding carbon content in it. And in doing so, we achieve a net zero carbon approach then. But this particular approach is now facing tremendous difficulty because of a variety of reasons. But for those who are interested, we can talk about it a bit later on. Now we'll look at the density carbon emission. Find the location for Hong Kong. We are actually towards the right-hand side of the graph, correspond to 6 ton carbon dioxide per person per year. From that, we can see we are pretty efficient in that sense, largely due to the fact that we don't have industry in Hong Kong compared to other advanced economies or developing countries that they have tremendous manufacturing industry. We don't. But we do have a very efficient mass transit or transport system. Therefore, we bring it to that particular location. But if we want to, for argument's sake, follow the 2-degree limit line, we need to continue to do a lot because we can't be complacent by having these two ingredients, being no industry and also the efficient transport. Then we stop doing anything. But instead, if we are trying to follow the 2-degree limit curve, then we need to do more on the zero carbon buildings approach. In Hong Kong, as the keynote speaker has rightly pointed out, super high-rise, highly density compact buildings developed in Hong Kong, hardly we can really make use of the available surface for collecting the renewable by PV. We can look at the efficiency. Basically, it's not very efficient to generate all this by renewable by just tapping on PV on the facade. So now I'd like to throw to you some thoughts about cost. Basically, there are three ways to look at it. Look at the measures, zero carbon measures or low carbon measures. One measures which can pay off itself over the life cycle. Simple. People will be interested in invest in it. Second is that those might not be able to pay off during its life cycle because of the slightly expensive technology, and those particularly falling into the third category, renewables, which hardly you can pay it off within the life cycle. I mean, could be more than 40 years. We need to assign measures or strategy to engage all these measures to be in place, to be implementable. So what we're suggesting is we need to legislate those low-hanging fruits, those easy to justify cost-effective measures by having regulations to control. You must do it. You have no other choices. But government can consider providing incentive, for example, by investing through the BEEF, by enabling not only developers with multi-tenancy changing the light bulb to T5, but instead they can use the money for single developers, a single tenant to use on, for example, changing the HVAC system. That will help to bring in more energy saving potentials, but in itself it needs incentive. The BEAM plus platinum and so on. But the feed-in tariff certainly is something that our government ought to look at. As previous speakers talk about it in Germany and in the UK and other advanced economies, this is a must. But at the moment, we cannot enjoy it, and meaning that there's no way renewable can be popular in this particular measure, Yaxley. Last, I'd like to highlight is the behavioral change. When I work on the West Kowloon concept plan, soon after I highlighted waste to energy, people said, no, we are not in the game of waste reduction. West Kowloon cannot have a waste treatment plant there, and it's for cultural. We don't care about zero carbon, zero energy, let's focus on cultural. But is it what we want? Look at what's happening in Germany or other advanced economies in Europe. They're exactly doing this. So I think we need to have a paradigm shift, and particular on this waste to energy issue. And there are a lot of well-executed examples. This one is in Sweden and a lot in Germany and so on, and that we can learn from. The last couples for the discussion point. High-rise, high-density development limit access to renewable resources, but minimizing the impact of urban fall by doing the urban fall in a much better way, facilitating zero-carbon strategy is something we need to explore and exploit. The initial and life cycle costs of achieving carbon zero are often very high, but we need to align the appropriate policies to the strategies in order to facilitate this. Finally, is the behavioral changes. Many strategies require significant changes to lifestyle and perceived norm, and we need education and pilot project that will work together with the community. So I hope West Kowloon will change their mind eventually. Thank you.